let me know so we can press play.
I am ready.
All righty, take it away.
Good evening, everyone. Whether you're here with us on Zoom or live streaming on Facebook, we're glad you're here. My name is Tamara Blair. I am co-chair for this Ward 7 ANC Redistricting Listening Session number 1. My co-chair is Commissioner Joel Castone. You'll hear from him shortly, but I do want to acknowledge our task force members. So we will briefly give them an opportunity to introduce themselves so that the public will be able to make a distinction between who's here as an attendee and who's actually part of the task force. So task force members, step right up and we'll just go around until we've gotten to everyone who's in attendance tonight.
Good evening, everyone. My name is Caprice Kaysen. I'm a task force member representing 7E, 7E04, SMB.
Good evening, everyone. My name is Max Richmond, task force member in 7C.
Good evening, I'm Tamika Bowden, and I'm task force member representing 7F05.
Good evening, I'm Marla Dean, and I'm task force member representing 7B.
Hey, good evening, everyone. I'm Justin Leaney. I'm a task force member representing ANC 7D.
Hi, everyone. Nisha Chung, task force member representing 7D1.
Hi everyone, my name is Travis Swanson, he, him pronouns, and I am an ANC commissioner in ANC 7B and here representing ANC 7B. Thank you.
Hey everybody, Brian Alcorn, I'm representing ANC 6A.
Good evening, my name is Patricia Stamper. I'm representing Deanwood, ANC 7C.
Hi there, good evening. My name is Melissa Freese. I'm a task force member representing ANC 7D.
Hi, everyone. Eric Rogers representing 7B. Sorry, I'm having a little issue with my video, but hopefully you'll be able to see me soon.
Good evening, everyone. I'm Wendell Felder. I'm a task force member and I'm representing ANC 7D as well.
Good evening, everyone. I'm Mandela Deskins. I am a task force member representing Capitol View, which is 7C and 7E.
Thank you. I think we have a few more out there. Task force members, if you're just logging in, we're just doing introductions. So if you haven't introduced yourself to our Zoom audience or our live stream audience on Facebook, step right up.
Good afternoon, everybody. I'm Ashley Ruff. I am for 7F. And sorry, I had issues with the internet, so that's why I was a little late. Thank you.
Thank you. Did I leave anyone out? Are there any more task force members that have not introduced themselves? If not, we will at this time pass things over to my co-chair, Commissioner Joel Castone. He'll just cover some brief points about how we're going to operate this evening going forward.
Thank you, Co-Chair Commissioner Blair. Hello, everyone. My name is Joel Castone. It is a privilege to be here today. This is our first session. We have 4 more to go, and we're starting off on the right foot. I would like to acknowledge a couple of housekeeping rules, if you will, while we're going through this today. The first thing I want to say is that we are very concerned about Ward 7 as a whole. So everything we're doing is for Ward 7 as a whole. Also, we want to be very intentional that we are respectful and not offensive with our words. which requires for us to be attentive and patient throughout this long process. I'm already prepared to be here. I know we say we're gonna be from 6 to 8. Nonetheless, we know we're taking care of business. It may spill over, but let us be patient. Also, I would like to say that we want to yield our public participants at least 3 minutes to be able to speak. And we want to give our task force members 5 minutes to speak. Now, our priority is to hear from the public. We know as task force member, we have a meeting that will be coming, which be solely us. So providing that time allows us to be able to share our points, but we definitely want to hear from the public. The public is why we're here to do this great job. Tonight, we'll be focusing on 7C and ANC 7E. And with that being stated, I'd like to turn over to our task force members. And I want to start with, I hope I'm saying your last name correctly, because my name is Caston. It's hard for a lot of people to say. It doesn't have the accent. And so I don't know if your last name is Casson or Casson. I don't know how it goes English. Language get me sometimes. Nonetheless, though, we were looking at Miss Caprice Casson from ANC E and Mr. Max Richmond from ANC 7C. Turn over to you to start our public listening session.
Thank you so much for that introduction. Task Force Member Kassan, would you like to go first? Would you like for me to go first? All right. I think you shook your head and pointed at me. Are you saying me? Is that right? Just want to make sure, as Mr. Kastan pointed out, we're being respectful. All right. Commissioner or Chair Blair, I just want to confirm, should I allot 3 minutes of time for my presentation here, or how much time should I allot for my presentation?
3 minutes, if it takes 3 minutes, you're perfectly, that's perfectly allowable. 3 minutes, and then 3 for our general public who's out there. If they are commissioners, we generally allow commissioners 5 minutes for these type of events.
Thank you for that. Next question, can I provide a map or show a picture of my area, or would it be better for me to provide this verbally? I just want to make sure I provide the best picture I can.
Absolutely, you can share your maps. Would love to see your map.
Great.
But we would also, if they're public attending, we would like to see their maps if they have it ready for us.
Great. All right. Well, I'll be very brief because I also eagerly await the public and their thoughts. My goal here is merely to set the scene for part of the 7C, part of the Ward 7 redistricting, particularly 7C. So I hope my 3 minutes can start now after I've clarified overall what I'm doing here. So with that, I'd first like to check, can you all see my screen here? Yep, seeing a thumbs up. Great. All right. Greater ANC 7C, I'd like to, here we are. This is a map. This is a Google map. This might be familiar when you look on your phone or look on the computer or try to get somewhere. This is not a map for redistricting yet. This is just a level set on the areas that we're talking about in 7C. There's a photo of me. I live here right on the border of 7C and 7D on the 7C side, over here on the western portion of this area. We also have, and I'd like to acknowledge, Ms. Patricia Stamper is also part of this task force and lives here more centrally in the part of ANC 7C. And I'd also like to acknowledge Mr. Mandela Deskins, who lives in the southern part, Capitol View, as he's illustrated. So as you can see, our borders are largely a function of our geography. We have here, typically to the northwest, both of 295 freeway as well as the railroad tracks, WMATA and CSX. We have Eastern Avenue, we have Southern Avenue, and we have East Capitol Street. So those are some of the sort of anchoring geographies for this area. Next, I just want to show you all using the 2020 census tracts, which census tracts that corresponds to. For those who are familiar with the Census Bureau, the census divides the country into counties, states, counties, and then as you get within a county, or in our case, our district, they start dividing it up into census tracts. So there are 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 census tracts that make up the ANC 7C area. You notice these do not correspond to the 2013 SMDs because those SMDs were from 2013, but this is merely to show you that there are 5 census tracts within 7C. Those census tracts are further subdivided into census block groups, which is the next level down. I'm not even going to attempt to count how many there are there, maybe 10, 12 or so. This is the same in every other part of the city as well. And then those census blocks groups are divided into census blocks, which are an even smaller geography. The Census Bureau does this so that they can roughly have the same population across these tracts so they can compare over time changes. This is actually the map of today's ANC 7C boundaries, which were established in 2013 using the 2020 census population. As we can see, the population varies from the low in ANC 7C03, where there are 1,600 people enumerated in the census, to the high of 7C01, where there are 2,700 people. The goal of this task force, is laid out in our very first meeting, is to make sure that as every SMD has a population of no less than 1,900 and no more than 2,100. So we can see that there is some work that we're going to need to do in our ANC. There is also a map here that we can get into later that shows those census blocks that we showed earlier with all of the population as we have it in the 2020 census. I'm just showing you that we have this data. This is data we can look at. I'm not going to go into it extensively right now. I want to acknowledge some very active neighborhoods and neighborhood associations in this area, many of whom I imagine are on the call this evening. Sorry, I jumped one. I'd like to acknowledge the Capitol View Civic Association, welcome their members, including Mr. Mandel Deskins, who is, I believe, their secretary, who is on this task force, as well as others. I'd like to welcome and acknowledge residents of Lincoln Heights and Richardson Dwellings, as well as folks who might be representing the Lincoln Heights Residents Council. This was built during the Second World War and continues to provide housing for folks in the area. I'd like to welcome Northeast Boundary Civic Association as another civic association that's been active for a very long time in this area. I'd like to recognize Dr. Gaffney and others who are part of that group. And then I'd like to acknowledge the Dean Winston Association, which, full disclosure, I am the treasurer of the Dean Winston Association. I know this group well. I'd like to also acknowledge Patricia Stamper, who is the secretary of the Dean Winston Association, and welcome other Dean Winston Association members, including many generations of presidents who are on the call. Last but not least, I want to acknowledge, let's see if this loads, other neighborhoods that might not have active civic groups, but are represented in this area. This includes Burrville, which is the sliver just east of Deanwood and north of Northeast Boundary, as well as Hillbrook, which is south of Deanwood. These groups do not currently have active civic associations, but have historically. With that, I just want to return very quickly to the Google map for my last 30 seconds here. I appreciate the flexibility of allowing me this time to introduce. I want to acknowledge a couple important landmarks in our area. We have the Deanwood Metro Station. We have the Nanny Helen Burroughs School. We have a number of other schools and recreation centers, as well as a meandering trail along the Marvin Gaye Park. We have the Deanwood Recreation Center, a number of schools, businesses, and establishments, including retail corridors along Nanny Helen Burroughs, Sheriff Road, Eastern Avenue. We also have retail corridors along Eastern and other parts of the neighborhood. With that, I will stop sharing my screen and yield my time back to the chairs. Thank you.
Thank you. Now we turn to you, Ms. Kaysen.
Good evening, everyone. So as Max have provided us some detailed maps, we are very close at 7E to a lot of what he prepared and has showed as we are the border of East Capitol coming down. We are a small part of Texas Avenue as it loops us back to Benning Road and kind of stop right at Kip where Fitch and G, however, 7E continues. I think for the most part for us, because we are coming out of, I'll say, the corner of Ward 7 into, there's a lot of community and churches, schools in which we are directly on the border of a split is what I identified with 7E. 7E is next to, you know, everyone coming down East Capitol, we split Benning Road, we split Southern Avenue, as we share Fort DuPont. So as we are inclusive with being on the border to everyone, we just want to be able to receive the public input as it relates to this, because we are the smallest SMBs are as well. We're right at 2,000. So as we are rearing that close and the range is 2,100, we really don't have that much adjustment to make in terms of the numbers and the requirement to stay within those numbers. However, we would like to, again, as I stated, take in the public's perspective as we go back to the table with the current other task member, which is Keith Towery from Marshall Heights Civic Association, as we continue to provide the input from 7E. Thank you.
Thank you. Let's hear from the public. Co-Chair Blair.
Yes, if we have members of the public, specifically residents that live in ANC 7C or ANC 7E, first let's take, and just in order, any residents that are with us this evening who want to share with us their thoughts. If they have maps they would like to share, they can also do that at this time, and then we'll follow that with any public attendees who would like to share their comments or maps from 7E.
All right, Commissioner Blair and Commissioner Castone, we do have one hand raised, Ms. Jamil Sanders. So I'm going to unmute her. Ms. Sanders, you have the floor.
Thank you very much, Ms. Bunn, and thank you, committee members and chairs. My name is Jamel Sanders. I'm the president of the Deanwood Citizens Association, and I come here tonight to speak directly and specifically regarding Deanwood. We are a very civic engaged neighborhood, and as Mr. Richmond stated earlier, our organization initially was founded in 1912. One of the challenges that we have faced for several years is that the Deanwood community is split between two commissions, including 5 single member districts. This makes a lot of our planning and advocacy work, significantly challenging, because we're having to try to coordinate across 2 different commissions. And we very much are appreciative of all the work all the commissioners in both commissions do on our behalf. It would be so helpful and incredible if the Deanwood neighborhood was included in one commission. It would greatly help of our advocacy work and especially our planning work, because one of our major community assets, the Deanwood Metro station, lies in the other commission. The majority of the neighborhood lies in one. And so what we're asking, what I'm asking, and really I would say our entire organization is asking for the committee members, is during this planning process to do everything you can to ensure that Deanwood is included in one commission. At the very least, if that is difficult, if not impossible, based on population numbers, we most certainly want our major assets included in one commission. We want to make sure that the commission that includes the Deanwood neighborhood goes at least through the railroad tracks all the way to Division when we look in east-west boundaries. And so again, we thank everyone for this work. I know it's challenging and difficult, and you're trying to satisfy a lot of interest, and we appreciate it. And again, please, as you're planning the northern part of the ward, do as much as you can to ensure that Deanwood lies in one commission. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Sanders. Commissioner Blair, you have 2 of your task force members that have their hands raised, I think, in response to Ms. Sanders. Commissioner Blair, you're muted.
Do we have any other members of the general public that would have any comments at this point?
Yes, so let me, the first hand that I saw raised after Ms. Sanders, I think may have been put down. Hold on one second. Let me just. And I am going to pronounce her name incorrectly, Miss Nugent. So apologies, but she was the next person. I'm going to unmute. Ms. Nugent, please forgive me, but you have the floor.
Great, thanks, Ms. Bunn, and thank you, task force members, for giving me the time to speak. My name is Dr. Tinvin Nguyen. I am a resident of ANC 7C, as well as the president of the Friends of Deanwood Library. Similar to Deanwood Citizens Association President Mr. Mel Sanders' comments, we too advocate for a single commission for the Deanwood neighborhood or the Deanwood community. This will certainly help with our visioning, small area planning, and overall coordination of services and assets. It also speaks to our united community vision for our assets and planning of our community. So for everyone who is on the call, for the better part of the past decade, library advocates have worked with ANC 7C to establish a library in Deanwood. As some of you know, it started as a very small kiosk and then became a small single room library in the Deanwood Recreation Center. This dates back to our very first representation under our first ANC commissioner, Miss Alice Chandler. And we've continued this relationship with ANC 7C07 Commissioner Antoine Holmes. We're excited that there is funding for a full service $24 million Deanwood Library, standalone library. Special thanks to Councilmember Gray, as well as DC Council as a whole, and Mayor Bowser for that funding. So it's a geographic and representational issue for us that our current small library at the Deanwood Recreation Center is in one commission, and that differs from our proposed future library, which to Ms. Sanders' point, includes the Deanwood Metro Station. So with that, it would be great if we can continue the advocacy and continue with our unified community voice and have a single commission for the Deanwood community, so that the current and future library remains in the same ANC. Over to you.
Thank you. Do we have any other members of the public?
Yes,
And
yes,
then-
ma'am. You have,
Okay.
yes, you have about 3 other folks. So let me.
Okay, so we'll take those 3 as you see them in the chat.
Okay. Give me
Before
one
we
second.
before we go on, or before we take any comments from our task force members.
Okay, let me lower some hands here. Hold on one second. She spoke. Okay, so if this is going to be your last round of questions, there are 1, 2, 3, 4 people whose hands were raised before you said last question. So last 4, if you're good with that, and then we can move on. Is that? So the next hand that I saw raised was David Smith. So David, you have the floor.
Good evening. Can you hear me?
Yes.
All right, great. Well, good evening. First, I wanted to thank all the committee members who volunteered their time to work on redistricting. I wanted to also acknowledge Max. I think he did an excellent presentation with the graphic illustrations of the multi different theological and the kind of the thinking behind how these lines are drawn. I wanted to also echo the sentiments of Deanwood President Saunders and Ms. Wynn, President Wynn for the library, that Deanwood currently is represented by multiple ANC commissioners representing multiple different overlapping communities. And so our ability to focus our efforts in the community in a way that allows more focus as a community has always been kind of divided. So I would really challenge the committee to look at the historic reasons of how that happened, both from a historic perspective related to the legacy of, redlining and Jim Crow, and the fact that over the last 40 years, despite Black leadership, those lines haven't changed, nor has really the philosophy of oppression related to how these lines are drawn. Often we think about the South, but really we're in the South. We're below the Mason-Dixon line, and a lot of historical things that happened then are still in place, regardless of who it benefits. It's something we should look at, and is why we have the opportunity. So I'm speaking on behalf of Deanwood Community Development Organization when I say from a historic perspective, Nanny Helen Burroughs, for instance, borders Deanwood along with Division Avenue. A lot of the development projects, because of how the current ANC lines are drawn, because of the last redistricting, kind of separates those business corridors in a way that doesn't allow the community, in some instances, to have full representation and voice. And I think we've done an excellent job as a commission working between communities. I think the communities are doing an excellent job. But I think it would be really helpful if the community lines were drawn equally with ANC and population distribution in a way that allowed the community to truly have an independent voice to represent itself. And also I would advocate that 295 be the dividing point between ANCC and ANCD, which would allow, again, that independence as development happens and infrastructure happens over the next 10 years. It's going to be kind of critical for all of our communities to really lock in and focus in. Thank you for the opportunity to share.
Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Smith. Next we have oops, one second. Next, we have Commissioner Anthony Lorenzo Green. Commissioner Green, you have the floor.
Thank you, Siobhan, and I want to thank the task force members for allowing me an opportunity to speak. My name is Anthony Lorenzo Green. I am the current Advisory Neighborhood Commissioner for 7C04. I've been representing this SMD since January 2017. Former second vice president of the Deanwood Citizens Association in the year 2018. DC native, grew up in Deanwood, Woodson alum. This whole community is my life. My goal really here tonight is to make sure that the longtime residents of Deanwood, their voices are elevated in this process, because we are a community that has gone through a lot of change in recent years, but we're still a community that operates as a village. And we want to make sure that the way the lines are drawn for 7C, as the previous speakers have mentioned, we want to try to make sure that Deanwood is completely within one commission. It really helps how we organize in our neighborhood, how we collaborate, especially with a lot of what I like to call legacy projects, where it seems like they've been going on for generation after generation. It really helps keep some consistency in our record planning and really how we're passing on the responsibilities that we have as leaders in our community to the next leaders who are coming up. Make sure that history is still in place, those agreements are still in place. And also, I want to make sure that we're being very intentional as we're looking at the number of people that live in our neighborhood, we also want to make sure that we are being very cognizant of the amount of formerly incarcerated citizens that live in our community and ensuring that their voices are elevated in this process, especially along the Eastern Ave, Sheriff Road corridor. We have housing in the community that's dedicated to veterans. So we're definitely a community that's has a lot going on. And we do have one, I ain't gonna say one, but we have several things in the pipeline when it comes to Sheriff Road, which runs directly down the middle of Deanwood. And you'll hear a lot of youngers say, when they talk about Deanwood, the areas closer to the station and the rec center is down bottom. Everything up by J Street is up top. And that's the way that we keep a dialogue going. And we want to make sure, even in this process, that it's very inclusive and you guys are doing everything you can. I know it's going to be difficult to try your best to keep Deanwood within one commission, and ensuring that it is a fair process and how we join our lines in our community. So I thank y'all, and I definitely will look forward to continue to be engaged in this process.
Thank you, Commissioner Green.
Commissioner.
All right, next up we have Ronald King. I see two versions of Ronald King here, so hopefully I'm letting the right one. Mr. King, you have the floor. If you are speaking, Mr. King, you are muted.
Good evening. Hi. I'd first like to thank the other speakers. They have addressed concerns of mine. They've all mentioned that it would be great if we could be in a single ANC. We have been doing a lot of work so far with Metro and looking at economic development. And the Deanwood Metro Station figures very prominently in that. We have been looking at development on that huge parking lot and putting a much needed grocery store there that would serve our neighborhood. We look at Fort Totten, we look at Rhode Island Avenue, and all of those Marylanders heading back out to the burbs see these vibrant shopping areas and oftentimes a light from the trains on the way home to do some grocery shopping or to eat at a restaurant. And the Deanwood Metro Station would be ideal for that because they could get off right there with the development over that humongous parking lot that runs all the way down to, well, beyond the Deanwood Metro Station, going towards Eastern Avenue. And that would bring us much needed resources for our city and services, not just for the residents in Deanwood proper, but for the entire community, because we know how desperately we need a shopping and venues here that would serve us. In many parts of the city, there are numerous grocery stores within blocks of each other. We've all been excited about the recent news of development finally beginning to be in the pipeline for the old site at East of Capitol Street at 58th Street. It seems as though if eminent domain takes place, we might finally get something there, but we should not be satisfied with just something there. And then the other two Safeways in the ward and Lytle. let's have something at this location, which is or would be strategic in attracting business and dollars from outside the city, since so many of our residents shop in the suburbs. And that is something that that particular site could certainly provide. And it's in the midst of Deanwood, but unfortunately, because of the current zoning, it's not within 7C. And so, as our former Deanwood president mentioned, Mr. Smith, if that boundary could move over to Kenilworth Avenue, 295, then that would indeed give us that and put it in one ANC. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. King. And our last two, we will hear from next, Alice Chandler. You have the floor.
Okay. Good evening. As some of the individuals mentioned earlier, I was perhaps the first Deanwood commissioner in this area, and I can agree with Max, Ms. King, Dr. Kelvin, and if someone I'm missing, please, Ms. Stamper. I've lived here the entire time, and I've seen how it went from being a unified area of Deanwood when parts of 7D were on the other side, and it wasn't 7D then. I believe it was something like 7A at that time. It would be really great if we could return to having all of Deanwood in one area so that you can have one voice and not having separate meetings taking place and doing something over here and then something else being done over there. So I am in agreement with what has already been stated, that we should have Deanwood return to having one 7C rather than, 7C for Deanwood rather than the numerous places or individual, instead of 7D being included. I hope that's clear. Are there any questions?
Yes, ma'am. I think you were very clear.
Okay, thank you.
Got it.
Thank you, Ms. Chandler. And our last public comment for the moment is Pauline Scott. You have the floor. Ms. Scott, if you are speaking, you're still muted. You need to unmute yourself. Let's see, let me ask you to unmute. Ms. Scott, are you there? Okay, commissioners, Ms. Scott may have stepped away, but she can always come back at another time if you wanted to go ahead.
Hi, can you hear me?
Yes, ma'am. Now we can hear you.
Okay, great. I had to find. I'm sorry for being late. I missed up the time, but I am in 7B01. And I have a concern because I was born and raised in DC. I was raised up in Marshall Heights, and then we moved. At that time, they didn't have ANCs. But since I've been living back here in 7B01, which is on the 3300 block of Du Bois Place Southeast, I have always felt, because we are smack in between Greenway and DuPont, but yet we're part of Twining. Everybody on this block and around the neighborhood, because I have connected with them and I have talked with them, we have always felt that we were stepkids and that we were left out of a lot of things. So we're thinking like this is our opportunity in order to speak and say, hey, you know what? We're here and we want to be a part of this to make sure that we are included into anything that is going on so far as getting an SMD, I think it's the acronyms are, or ANC, whereas someone is going to sit up there and take our concerns and our issues in order to think about our neighborhood, because I'm very concerned about our neighborhood. There's a lot of things going on, and I don't feel like we got the proper representation. So I don't know if this is the right avenue for that, but I wanted to speak out to say, hey, I'm over here at 3320 from D Street to C Street. That is look like we are absolutely isolated and sometimes not included. And I can give you several instances where we felt as if we were not informed, not included. So I don't know if this is the right venue or the right avenue or the right, place to express that. But please, whoever is taking care of 7B, please consider 7B01 so far as C Street, from D Street from D Street to C Street. Just those 3 blocks.
I'm listening, Ms. Scott. I'm a task force member, Eric Rogers from 7B. So I'll be in touch with you, Ms. Scott.
I would appreciate it. Do you have my phone number? Because I would give it to you so we can contact. And so that, because I wanted to be on I applied, but I wasn't accepted. I want to be on, I want to get involved. I want to make sure that my neighborhood is included in anything that is going on, because I am totally frustrated with how we have been handled over in this little 3-block area.
Ms. Scott, if you would drop your contact information into the chat, Task Force Member Eric Rogers, your neighbor, he said he will definitely be in touch with you. Thank you for being here tonight, and thank you for your input.
Thank you.
Commissioners Blair and Castone, that is the end for the public comment. At this time, you have 3 task force members, however, that have their hands raised.
Okay, I think at this point, initially I was thinking we would hear from 7E, but at this point, the commissioners that have, the task force members that have their hands raised, I'm guessing their comments or questions are in reference to 7C. So let's hear from the task force members who have had their hands raised for some time. Thank you.
Yeah. Yes, I saw Lee Wilson had his hand raised first.
Thank you, Ms. Bunn. I just want to remind my task force fellow members that I am a resident of ANC 7E. And I want to speak to some of the same comments that the public from 7C has expressed. We have that same problem. I've talked on several occasions with my civic association president, who is on today, Sharon Shanklin Brown. She is the president of the Benning Ridge Civic Association. If you look at maps of 7E, and I just want to remind Ms. Kaysen and Mr. Towery that we probably need to get together. We are the 3 task force members from 7E, and in order for us to make our case, I think that we need to probably make a presentation as Mr. Justin Leaney did with maps. Not going to take a whole lot of time, but in the case of 7E, there are some neighborhoods that were once in 7B. In particular, there's a part of Fort Davis community that is in 7E and in 7B. And in the Benning Ridge community, with the Benning Ridge Civic Association, part of Benning Ridge is in 7F, I believe, and part of it is in 7E. And we have a lot of older members, seasoned citizens in our community. And sometimes it can be somewhat confusing because the way the boundaries are currently drawn. Some of those people come to Benning Ridge Civic Association meetings, but they're in another ANC. So we as well agree and are and advocate along with our fellow Ward 7 residents that are in 7C, in particular, a number of people from Deanwood who have expressed that you bring those communities together, making those boundaries with the Civic Association as well as the ANCs. Fort Davis community was 10 years ago was fully in 7B. And then after the last census, they were in part of them, the northern part of their community was placed in 7E. And I know this is a difficult task to try to bring those communities whole, but I truly want to make certain that we look at all the angles and really consider bringing those communities and those civic associations in the same boundaries as the ANC. As well, we also have to remember that 7E crosses a major thoroughfare, which is Benning Road. Part of 7E, a good part of 7E is in Marshall Heights to the east of Benning Road, and the other part on the western side of Benning Road is Benning Ridge, and you also have the community of public housing section that is also part of another ANC as well. So I do want to emphasize that we have that same concern in 7E, and we want to make certain that those communities and ANCs come into a wholeness. Thank you.
Thank you. I do see one question in the chat asking if we can bring up a general map while people are talking so that we can reference the map. Mr. Leaney, do you happen to have a map up?
I didn't give the presentation, but I do have maps up on the other screen, so I can screen share.
I just thought you might be Johnny on the spot, so to speak, and have a map up that we could reference as people are speaking.
And it looks like Melissa Fries is our hero here.
All right. Yeah, thank you, Melissa Fries, another task force member. Thank you.
And Commissioner Blair, the two other task force members who had hands raised were Travis Swanson and Justin Leaney, and Dr. Marla Dean, and Keith Towery, but Travis was next.
Commissioner/task force member Swanson, go right ahead.
Thank you, Chairwoman Commissioner Blair. I just had a quick clarifying question for some of the speakers, and I'm hoping they can maybe comment even in the chat. It would be helpful, particularly something that was said by several people. Hope I'm not forgetting anybody. I believe Ms. Sanders, Dr. Nguyen, Commissioner Green, and former Commissioner Chandler. All of them spoke to wanting to see Deanwood entirely in one commission, and I just wanted to clarify, are you looking to have it entirely in like a commission is in 7B or in a single SMD as much as possible? I just wanted some clarification on what you're asking us to consider. Thank you.
I'm happy to also speak to that if that would be helpful, Co-Chair Blair. This is Max Richmond, 7C as well.
Sure, go right ahead.
I don't want to put words in their mouths, so they're most welcome to write things into the chat. But the population of Deanwood would be much larger than any one SMD, which is currently why it's represented by 5 SMDs. So I think as Commissioner Green just wrote in the chat, the goal would be for it to be within one commission, meaning made up of 7 SMDs or whatnot. But it could include, of course, neighboring communities as well.
Great, thank you for that clarification. Max, as well as Commissioner Green.
Thank you. Who's next? I believe it's Mr. Leaney, is it?
That's right.
Okay.
I have a somewhat similar question for the Deanwood Civic Association leadership in particular. So expanding the boundary from Minnesota Avenue to 295 would add the neighborhood that includes Polk Street, Olive Street, and part of Eastern Avenue. I was curious if you had a number, if that was sort of one of your areas where you had a lot of members at. I'm not too familiar with who people in that neighborhood associate with most closely in terms of their civic association.
I can speak to that as well, Chair Blair, if you'd like, but I think we could also invite the previous speakers to speak as you prefer.
It's perfectly permissible for you to speak. That's one of the purposes of having you kind of lead things off, because it wouldn't make sense for me to lead off. I'm not as familiar with your community as you are. So go right ahead.
I do want to be, as you can tell, very deferential to the community, as I just want to be, allow them the opportunity and space to speak. So again, not to speak for them, but I would say we have a number of members that are in that area, including one who passed during COVID, unfortunately. Peter Espenschield, who tragically passed during the pandemic, lived in this area, was very active, helped co-found the Friends of Deanwood Library, was also very active in the Deanwood Citizens Association. And we have other residents in that area who have been quite active in 7D recently around proposed housing that's happening in the area that they've also involved the Deanwood Citizens Association with. But frankly, the ambiguity around it being part of the Deanwood Citizens Association, but split across ANCs, has added to complexity to solving local community needs.
Thank you. And for people who knew Peter, he was a good community advocate. I served with him on the transportation committee in 7D. So I'm really sorry to hear of his loss, of that loss.
I will echo that sentiment. I've known Peter for just a short period of time, but he's always attending as many community meetings as possible. Thank you for that information. Sad to hear that.
And Commissioner Blair, Dr. Marla Dean, and Keith Tyree had their hands raised as well. Dr. Dean was first.
Okay, let's hear from Dr. Marla Dean, task force member.
Thank you. I just want, I don't know who's keeping notes, but I want us to start to try and codify some of the things we're hearing and see if they hold up through all the listening sessions. I am hearing a strong propensity toward us trying to make sure that communities are whole, that it is burdensome on community members to have to go to multiple ANC meetings, and then it is burdensome for civic associations to have to kind of intermingle between multiple ANCs. So I just want us to make sure that we're capturing that. I mean, I'm hearing that people want to make sure that the community assets in their areas align with boundaries and ANCs. And so I just want to make sure that we're capturing that, because at a certain point, we're going to need some guiding principles. The opening statement was that we're to act for the entire ward. So in order to act for the entire ward, we need to start to develop some guiding principles.
Thank you, Shannon.
Thank you, Dr. Dean, for those comments. If I don't have the principles in front of me, but I believe Chief of Staff Bunn may possibly have those at hand to share with us the official principles of what we're doing and what we're using as our guidance.
Well, let me not use the word guidance. Let me just say our decision-making principles then. So how do we begin to actually make decisions? Because we're going to be forced to make some hard decisions. And I think we are going to need to map back to these very important themes that we're already starting to hear from various communities. So that's it.
Okay, we can have those sent out to our task force going forward. I'll definitely make sure that happens. And who's next? Is that Keith Hassan Towery next?
Yes, ma'am.
Hey everybody, how y'all doing? It's so good to be back in cold DC, but I'm definitely happy to be back here. I want to apologize for my absence for a few days. I have not followed all of the emails and I'm still catching up. I think what I've heard or what I'm hearing, I know that Ms. Casson gave a great presentation about 7E, as also Mr. Wilson did too. I'm also a 7E resident. I'm also privileged to be on the task force, so I just also wanted to make a few comments as well, if that's okay. Particularly, the first thing I just wanted to talk about or just say was I deeply understand and hear the concerns from 7C, particularly trying to keep things neighborhood based. I think the speakers that we've had present today did an awesome and articulate job of explaining the importance of keeping a community together as much as we can. But you know, it also presents itself some very unique challenges. For one, I think Deanwood is one of the largest communities that we do have here in Ward 7. And as much as I would hate to see Marshall Heights ever split across multiple ANCs, there are so many constraints and restraints that we have to take into consideration when it comes to redistricting. So as much as we can deem possible to keep a neighborhood together, I definitely think that should always be a guiding principle of this task force and something that we provide as terms of recommendations. I will want to hear from any community that is as large as Deanwood. You know, if we can't keep a community together within an ANC boundary, you know, what will be an acceptable division line? Where does it make sense to actually split the community up amongst each other? Again, not saying that we want to split communities. I don't think anybody really wants to do that, but because of the size, we have to make some tough decisions. So I think it would be really great to hear from the community where they think those natural separations could occur that could also still empower their community to be as great as they are. As it relates to 7E, 7E is an awesome community too, and it presents some great opportunities for us to kind of reshape and redefine. What you heard Mr. Wilson talk about earlier was he talked about the portion of Fort DuPont that we have that is in 7E. One of the things that I always thought kind of peculiar or odd was that we had that slither of land from Fort DuPont. And I always felt that they felt a little disconnected from the community in general. And going back to the thoughts and the points about keeping communities together as best as we can, I think that's definitely a piece of the community that we may want to consider trying to either create a natural boundary such as a bending road, the major thoroughfare that Mr. Wilson spoke about, to try to maintain an integrity of a community or a different feel of the community and so forth. But I did want to make sure that I wanted to raise my hand, apologize for my late absence, and provide a few remarks. And I definitely agree with Mr. Wilson and Ms. Casson that we need to also submit a map in the fashion that Mr. Leaney did. And thank you again for allowing me to have time today to speak.
Thank you. You're most welcome.
Commissioner Blair, can I interrupt for just a second?
Sure, absolutely.
Because this has been great conversation, and to piggyback on what Dr. Dean said, my team, we are taking notes, but it is also helpful that in response to the task force members' questions, if people can continue to write their thoughts in the chat. I am saving the chat, and that information will be provided to the task force. So the commentary in the chat is good, so please keep that coming, because we may not be able to answer every live question or get to every live comment, but please write it in the chat so we can have written documentation, and it will be shared with the task force. So like Dr. Dean said, those running themes can be captured.
Thank you. I believe that was the end of the comments. Most of the comments were in reference to 7C. But if there's, at this time, we can move over to 7E. If we have anyone in the public attending on the phone.
Let me check. Let's see if we have any additional hands raised. I'm sorry, I'm looking in the wrong one. All right, I see a couple people here. I'm gonna go with folks that have not spoken thus far, and then I'll come back to folks who may have additional commentary. But this is, as Commissioner Blair said, in reference to 7E. So I am going to first call on Valerio Johnson. Oops, give me 1 second. It's hard for me.
All right. Good evening.
You have the floor.
Thank you, Ms. Bunn. How are you? Also, thanks to everybody on the call, task force members. This is a really tough assignment, a very important duty that you all have signed up for. Kudos to everybody involved. Just briefly, I think I was a part of the last one. I've been a commissioner in the 7B corridor, 7A corridor for 10 years or so. I don't know. I put a note in the chat, and I just wanted to piggyback and get that point of view on record. I think Task Force Member Lee Wilson made a distinction about how communities are split on this side of town between multiple commissions. I do like the idea of figuring out a way to put Fort Davis back into ANC 7B. It is difficult to manage constituent concerns when the lines are dividing as such. I do represent HCCA, and HCCA as a community, largely in part is 7B, and HCCA does represent Fort Davis and has a membership base in Fort Davis. So like the members of 7C, if those communities those neighborhoods could be drawn in a singular commission boundary, that would be greatly appreciated if it was considered. And technically, it probably would be easier if the committee task force would consider looking at 7B along some of the natural boundary lines, and 7B could offer maybe 1,000 or so residents to the cause of redistributing and redrawing lines that could be helpful to 7C and 7E as they work to figure out how to be more inclusive of their neighborhoods within their commission boundaries. If anybody care to look for support or have an opinion, I'm here to be supportive and helpful. Thank you.
Thank you, Commissioner Johnson. All right, we will next go to Sharon Shanklin Brown. Give me 1 second to find you.
Yes, good evening, everyone. I think Lee Wilson spoke for Benning Ridge. I yielded my words to him, and it's something we all have talked about in Benning Ridge. We're centrally located, and I'm sorry, this is the president of Benning Ridge Civic Association. And my recommendation is that you look at some of the boundaries according to, I think Valerio said it, the main streets such as Texas Avenue, Mass Avenue, and Benning Road. Benning Road seems to be sufficient in that on one side of Benning Road is Benning Ridge, and on the other side is Marshall Heights. But I believe probably most of us that are civic associations representatives are in agreement that our communities need to coincide with our ANCs. I currently have 7E and 7F members that reside in Benning Ridge. And it does get difficult for people, and especially new people when they move into the communities, because they find themselves at one meeting, but then having to go to something totally different or not at all. So I think it would make a difference if you probably look at some of those streets and maybe find ways that we can draw some lines that make sense. I know what happened in the last census. Nobody bothered to even include the civic associations, and this was a result of that. My husband was an ANC commissioner, and I sat in on that meeting and I saw it happening. Metropolitan Police was redistricted. Everybody was redistricted, but the civic associations. So it would make sense to put the people in the various communities in with their respective ANCs. I think that would help immensely. And people would be able to, you know, for me, I go to 7E meetings and I go to 7F meetings, and I do 7F so that I can maybe share with some of my seniors in 7F what's going on. And sometimes I've had Terrell to send information so I can put it out to them. So it can be an inconvenience, not for me, but for the residents. So I think in all fairness, we need to really look at that. And thank you for including civic associations this time.
Thank you, President Shanklin Brown. Next, we are going to move to Commissioner Kelvin Brown. Commissioner Brown, you have the floor.
Thank you so much, Ms. Bond, and thank you to the committee members and the public at large for spending the evening talking about a very important issue, such as redrawing the ANC boundaries for the next 10 years. I just want to offer up just a quick comment for consideration for the entire body here tonight, in that as an outcome of the 2020 census, one of the things that was shown in the data was that the percentage, and specifically to ANC 7B, is that there was a precipitous drop off in the number of voting age residents that lived in specifically ANC 7B06, also ANC 7B05. However, the number of residents grew, meaning there were more children born in those two SMDs. So as we have conversations about whether to give up residents or not, or how to redraw the boundaries, that might be one data point to take a look at, is the number of voting age residents that are being allocated to each SMD and to the commission as a whole. Thank you.
Thank you, Commissioner Brown. And next, and you have two more, Commissioner Blair.
Okay,
next,
go ahead.
Go ahead. No, go ahead.
I was going to say, I still see, I see Task Force Member Lee Wilson's hand up, but I don't know if that's from earlier or if that's new.
No, it's not, Chairperson. Real quickly, I'm sorry to barge in. I just want to, for a person who's probably taking notes or being described, I think I said something incorrectly, as well as Task Force Member Keith Towery. We both, I think, referred to Fort Davis as Fort DuPont. And I just want to make certain, and we get clarity, that that section of 7E, that is we're referring to is Fort Davis, not Fort DuPont. Now I apologize, and I'm sure I can apologize on behalf of Mr. Towery as well, but that is Fort Davis we were talking about, not Fort DuPont.
Mr. Wilson, Keith and I cleared that up in the in our conversation in the chat. So yes, absolutely.
I wasn't looking at the chat. Thank you, Dr. Dean.
Commissioner Blair, you have 2 remaining public commenters, if you want to take.
Absolutely. We want to hear from the public. Absolutely. That's our priority this evening.
All right. So Linda Green has not had an opportunity. Linda Green, you have the floor.
Thank you and good evening, and I appreciate this. I just put my comments in the chat, and thank you very much, Sheila Bond. And I just wanted Mr. Lee Wilson, who's a member of the Ward 7 Redistricting Task Force, and his comment was well received, and I'm in 100% agreement with him that the 3 Redistricting Task Force members need to get together and review the boundaries, because before I was in 7B and during the last redistricting, I ended up in 7E. And the Fort Davis community is very divided because of the redistricting, because they needed to have the population to be equal, I understand. But at the same time, it created a lot of problems for the community. So if any way possible, after the redistricting has been done in terms of review, comments, issues, identify the challenges, what we can do to resolve the challenges. And because Fort Davis is an age-friendly community, and Fort Davis Civic Association was organized in 1960 in September. And the oldest living founder of Fort Davis is Miss Lillian Chapman. And she just turned 100 years old, and she is still a historian for the community. So I'm in agreement with Mr. Lee Wilson. I'm currently in 7E02. I'm Commissioner Emeritus, and I'm also the current president of the Fort Davis Civic Association. And we will be starting our meetings up in March because there was a vote taken, and that's what the community rendered by vote. So if the Fort Davis community can be redistricted back to 7B, that would resolve a lot of the frustrations and headaches that this community has been facing since the last redistrict. And so I rest my comments, and if anyone want to address what I had just addressed, I would be very appreciative, and thank you very much.
You're more than welcome.
So next we have Martha Assefa. Apologies if I mispronounced your name. Miss Martha, you have the floor.
Hi, I am new to the neighborhood. I've been here for 2 years, but because of COVID, I don't know most of you yet. I'm in 7B01, and I still don't know what my neighborhood is called. I hear lots of different conflicting things. I'm on M Place. Does anyone have a definitive neighborhood name for where I am? That's my first question. And then I heard a lot of talk, and I don't know if it's accurate, about including potentially Eastern Market-ish kind of neighborhood in Ward 7. And I just wanted to know, is that accurate that they're talking about including the other side of the river? Because I have a lot of concerns about that. Thank you.
Thank you for your question. The 7B01, I'm not sure that I'm the most knowledgeable person to answer that question. As far as what's going on the west side of the river, the boundary of Ward 7 now extends over to 15th Street, which is still quite a distance from Eastern Market. So Eastern Market remains part of Ward 6. And as far as there are portions of 6A and 6B that are now part of Ward 7, and we will address that in our third listening session, which hasn't been scheduled at this point. So there's a lot of work to
Commissioner
be
Blair,
done
I may
on
be
the
able to
west
answer
side.
that second question as well.
Okay.
If you're done.
Go right ahead.
Okay, just for the question of which neighborhood that is, my name is Travis Swanson. I'm the commissioner for 7B03, which is just south of where you are. I started Nash Place. The reason you might be hearing multiple things is because in Washington, D.C., neighborhood boundaries are not legally defined in law like they are in some cities. So it can be a little bit subjective. There might be some areas where multiple neighborhoods kind of claim an area, but I think that area would either be Twining or potentially DuPont Park or maybe even Greenway. I'm not sure if Greenway kind of claims that far south, but that might be why you're hearing multiple names, because it's not actually legally defined in law.
Thank you, Commissioner Swanson.
All right. Next we have, I'm going to go to someone who has not spoken yet, and that is Varetta Mills. You have the floor. And you need to unmute yourself.
Hello, good evening. Can
Good
you hear
evening.
me? Yes.
Yes, ma'am.
Okay, I'm Miss Mills and I'm a 67-year-old Washingtonian, born and raised up East Capitol in 58th, where the new supposedly stores is supposed to be built years ago, but I hope they come soon. And I have two comments. I have gone to Ben & Starter. Okay, I'm sorry. I live on the corner of Texas and East Capitol. And I have gone to meetings at Ben & Starter, and they told me I wasn't supposed to be there. The ANC says I'm not supposed to be there. I have gone to the Capitol View meetings. I'm not supposed to be there. And I went to a meeting at Shad Elementary when it was Shad, and the ANC person was there, said I'm not supposed to be there. So I'm concerned, which ANC am I to belong to? And my second question is, when the task force is introducing themselves, some of us are not aware of the areas in which you are an ANC representative. So can you please, while introducing yourselves, say, I'm an ANC of Texas Avenue, Benning Road, let us know where you working at, what area you working in, so that we can be familiar with it, the area. Then I say, oh, okay, and I know which ANC is which. I'm looking at the map, but I see Texas Avenue, but it's over there on the Pennsylvania Avenue side. But I'm talking about the Texas Avenue on the East Capitol Street side, southeast. So which ANC do I belong? Thank you.
Ms. Mills, this is Director Humphrey, Councilmember Gray's office. You're most likely is in 7F, but if we can speak offline, I will get your address and make sure that I follow with you, make sure that we get you the right.
Okay, I'm sorry, your name again?
Sure. My name is D.L. Humphrey. I'm the
Oh,
director.
D.L. Humphrey. Okay, Mr. Humphrey, yeah, I remember you.
Yes,
Okay,
I think we have spoken. So I'll
yes,
make sure.
we have.
Yeah, so I'll
Oh,
make sure the information back. And
oh, thank you so
we'll
much.
follow. You're
I
welcome.
really appreciate that.
No problem, Ms. Mills. You have a great night.
You too, enjoy yourself as well.
Thank you. Thank you for
Uh-huh.
attending.
Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Mills.
You're welcome, thank you.
All right, next, the two remaining hands I see, I'm gonna go back to Ms. Alice Chandler. You have the floor. And you'll need to unmute, Ms. Chandler.
I meant to lower my hand, but once again, I would suggest that everything that's west of the Kenilworth return to being called 7A. That would make much more sense to me now that the population has grown on that side of the river. I mean, up that side of the highway. Thank you.
Thank you, ma'am. And the last hand I see is Commissioner Valario Johnson. Commissioner Johnson, you have the floor.
Thank you. I appreciate the second go round. I just had a question, and I wanted to know if the committee, the task force could answer it, and then I have a comment. So I'll do the comment first. I heard Commissioner Chandler's voice. Just wanted to shout her out. She's someone who was very instrumental in my beginnings. So it's good to see that she's still committed. And I do like her idea about 7A and 7A possibly being on the west side. Now, with that being said, the question for the task force, and if you don't have it now, that's fine. But I'm not that intimately involved in this process as I was with the political boundary drawing, but I do know the numbers that I remember. I think the ward with the redistricting of political boundaries and the natural growth over the last 10 years, I think it was 4,500 natural growth, and then I think 9,400, roughly 9,400 with the redrawing of the political boundaries. I may be wrong. Someone more smarter than me could definitely fix that. But that to me lends itself to 7 single member districts, potentially.
Commissioner Johnson, you're going in and out. It sounds like you may have hit a bad connection area.
I'm sorry. We could
Commissioner Johnson, we didn't hear anything you just said. You blanked out for a good 30 seconds.
Oh man, I'm over here. All right, I'm over here off D1 now. Let me get closer to, I don't know, tower. What was the last thing you heard, Ms. Buck?
You were saying about 7 commissions. That's all I heard. Or 7 SMDs. It was hard to understand.
Okay, all right. I think we can carve 6 for sure, but 7 SMDs possibly, if everybody concedes to being under 2,000, slightly. And I think we could get that 6th commission west, maybe part of the river. And I just want to add this historical fact. When I first started, Twining, Greenway, and Fairlawn was Ward 6, and the dividing line was Minnesota Avenue. And then 2000 it switched. Twining, Greenway, Fairlawn became Ward 7, and then 10 or 11, Fairlawn moved to 8, and Twining and Greenway stayed 7. But those shifts went from 7A, Twining went from 7A to 7B, and part of Greenway went to 7B. Both of those were 7A. So I share that with that. I really believe with the population growth that it is very possible that the larger communities, Deanwood, Hillcrest, Spinning Ridge, Fort Davis, all could like squeeze into a commission. And lastly, I wanted to say, I'm not certain if decisions should be made about voting age population with commissions, because I think we all would be within the same political ward boundaries, and it may complicate the matter if we look at age eligible voting population and trying to draw these lines versus the principle of continuity and communities of interest, probably which would be the more important value. And listening to this call, it sounds like the more important value would be keeping defined neighborhoods together. And for the young lady who lived on M, depending on what side of Minnesota Avenue you're on, you would be Twining, or the Civic Association would be, the neighborhood would be Twining, depending on what side of Minnesota Avenue you're on, and the neighborhood association, depending on what side of Minnesota Avenue you're on, would be DuPont Park. All right, thank you for tolerating my list and comment.
Thank you, Commissioner Johnson. Give me 1 second. All right, Commissioners Blair and Castone, that's it for hands raised for public comment. I do see that you have 2 task force members with their hands raised. And that would be task force members Towery and Leamy.
Before we jump over to task force members Keith Hassan Towery and Mr. Justin Leaney, former Commissioner Justin Leaney, I just want to piggyback on what Commissioner Johnson just stated about the potential for 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 7 potential for 7 commissions. It's definitely, the numbers are potentially there. Just want to, don't hold me to these as being exact numbers, but it appears with my math that ANC 7B is over by 1,150. 7C is over by 1,300 in population. 7D is over by 2,482. 7E is over by 347. And 7F is over by 2,095. That's just what had been existing before we acquired portions of 6A and 6B. I have not tallied up those numbers. Just want to put that out there for consideration for the task force as we go forward. And at this point, we can go to the next hand up on our task force. I believe that's Hassan Towery, task force member.
Chair Blair, since you asked Mr. Leaney, Commissioner Leaney, a question, you want him to go first?
I didn't particularly have a question for him. I was just trying to go in sequence the way Chief of Staff Bunn recognized hands.
Well, I definitely don't mind yielding my time because to me, it seemed like you made a comment that maybe Commissioner Leaney may want to opine on. So I wouldn't want to miss that momentum and that opportunity for you.
Okay.
Yeah. Thank you, Commissioner. Thank you, Mr. Towery. I think the comment may have been regarding the number of SMDs, was it? Or the new number of SMDs we probably could produce? which wasn't quite what I wanted to talk about, but yeah, in terms of the number of SMDs, I think I counted probably 4 or 5 in addition to the new ones that were already districted into Ward 7. However, what I did want to talk about was the subject of natural boundaries. I think Ward 7 has some really good ones with the parks that are visible on the map that's being shared now. But I have a suggestion that we might be able to use for our, as sort of a rule to look at for natural boundaries. I'm going to share a map. Oh, Melissa, could you stop sharing for a moment? I'd like to share a map. Thank you. One of the boundary types that I think we could use are arterial roads and highways. So on this map of Ward 7, you can see East Capitol here, Benning Road here, 295. When we're thinking of some of where to define edges and communities, perhaps some of these roads like Minnesota Avenue, East Capitol, and I think that, I don't know what one that is, Benning Road. Oh, Benning Road.
Massachusetts Avenue is one too, a major one.
What's that?
Massachusetts Avenue is a major one.
Yeah, Massachusetts. Yeah, I'm just thinking we don't want to really split it down any further than the blue lines on this map, but that might be, if we're trying to come up with some rules that we can apply consistently to sort of, as we're thinking about this map, this might be one way we want to do it. And I can share the link to this map in the chat. That's all of my comments for now.
Thank you, Mr. Leamy. Task Force member and former commissioner from 7D. Let me check the time. We're doing good on time. I have 7:38. And let's make one more pass for any questions directly in reference to 7C or 7E.
Commissioner Blair, you have 2 task force members who have questions. I don't know if it's specific to your question, but you have 2 hands raised. Nothing in the public comment.
Okay, well, we'll move to task force comments. I'm not sure whose hand was up first.
So I think that Task Force Member Tyree yielded his time to Task Force Member Leamy. So I think Task Force Member Tyree will be next, and then Dr. Dean.
I can go.
Yeah.
Go right ahead.
Okay. I wanted to comment on slightly on what Mr. Johnson provided and asking some questions that I know that as a subcommittee we're going to tease out a little bit and get a little bit more confident in what we will be able to say publicly about how many more SMDs should be presented and what should be carved out and what. I think that's really good questions that were provided during his testimonies and the testimonies before. I think though, you know, for us to be fair and not to jump the gun or to raise alarm for anybody, you know, until we are certain exactly where we think these things should go, we shouldn't be saying we're going to have, you know, 5 or 9 or 10 new SMDs or brand new ANCs, just to kind of make sure that we are all somewhere close on the same page with it, because we can all cut numbers. We can all look at how numbers should look, but we probably just want to be a little bit intentional with that, just to preserve the knowledge of this body and the respect for this body. And the other thing I just wanted to say too, in terms of as we're just thinking globally, big picture, yeah, I really believe in unity, and I don't just say it because it's just a crazy word or whatever, or it's a hot word. It sounds nice and pretty. I really do believe in that. And as we're thinking about the new neighbors that we have inherited, I do want to make sure that it is unified, and I want to make sure that we don't have these divisions between east of the river and the west of the river. So as we're having these conversations, they're open conversations, and we're not coming in with any biases that we may, or people may perceive us to have as we are trying to figure out what's going to work for this ward that we love, Ward 7. Thank you.
Dr. Dean?
I have a question now for Keith. I was going to make a different comment, but I needed something clarified, Keith, if you don't mind. I want to understand what you were saying a little bit better. We're getting 14,000 new residents by population growth, as well as our new neighbors from Ward 6. With that, we have to figure out a way to bring them into our family, right? I mean, so if we take 14, the standard rule of 2,000, give or take, we are trying to figure out whether they go into existing commissions or whatever happens. We need to figure out about 7 more commissions, right? I mean, around. Is that what, I mean, I want to make sure I was understanding what the point you were making, because I'm just looking at the map and it seems like that is going to have to happen. I agree. We want to be unified. I do not want communities to be siphoned off. I don't want communities to be, I do not want us to spiral into fiefdoms and tribalism. I do not want any of that. So I'm really I want to understand what you were saying so that I'm clear, because I'm not sure I was clear on what you were saying.
Chair, am I able to respond or?
Sure, go right ahead.
Sure. Dr. Dean, you saying you don't want to see a Game of Thrones for Ward 7?
I do not. I'm not interested.
Dr. Dean, you look real good on top of a dragon. I can see that, so, but all that aside, I think the core of what I was getting at, yes, we do know that, behind the map envelope counts, that needs to happen, and we can have a general idea about how many new commissions we need to expand or what direction trajectory we're going to. I think the beauty of these conversations we're having in the public right now is we're having an opportunity to listen to what our Ward 7 residents would like to see, like how they're framing the arguments that they want to keep neighborhoods together as best as they can. Mm-hmm. I think as we start to collect that information, and then we take all of the other boring, technical, nerdy stuff that we need to do behind the scenes together, then we may be more confident in saying that we think as a subcommittee, maybe it is adding 4 additional SMDs. Maybe it is resurrecting 7A. I just think that prematurely right now for us to try to give a number just may create more anxiety than it does help people understand what we're trying to do at this time. Okay. I hope that kind of fill in the gaps of what I was trying to say.
No, right, I get it. No, I mean, I'm completely agnostic on the number of commissions at this point or the number of SMDs in the commission. I was just trying to figure out from a population standpoint, approximately how many are we going to have to try and work into this complex puzzle. That's it. Okay.
Co-chair, we have one other hand raised, Ms. Tamika.
Good evening. One of the things that has come up, and I think Keith, you hit on a little bit, is around this historical context. And is there a place that we can figure out or learn from the why 7B landed in 7F, the politics there, why the boundaries are split the way they are? I think that would help inform so we don't walk back down those same paths again as things have been done. So is there a place that we can go to see where why things work, how this all shaped out 10 years ago to land where we have now, so that we I think Dr. Dean said it well, like as one of these are, I mean, in addition to the 2 things that she named, I think this historical piece keeps coming up. And I would hate for us to not have that as we're trying to fit 2,000 people into a peg that is not going to work based off of what we've already seen. Sorry, not seen, what we know.
I will have to look into that to try and find some support that would keep us from going down a path that we don't want to go. I wasn't involved in the last redistricting, although I was definitely a resident here. I was not as actively involved as I am at this current time. So yes, we will look into that. Thank you.
And I think this is Commissioner.
Oh, I'm sorry, Commissioner Blair, this is Sheila from Councilmember Gray's office. We have been trying to locate the reports from the last task force from 10 years ago. We have not been successful, but Terrence Northwest, our legislative director, he is on the hunt for those. So if we are successful in getting that information, we will definitely share it with the task force. So you'll at least have that piece of history.
Thank you, Chief of Staff Bunn. Do we have any more public contributions this evening? Anybody else from the public?
I see one hand raised. However, Commissioner Johnson has spoken twice already. But if you want to go a third round, that's the only hand that's raised for public comment.
Sheila, if you don't mind, because I wanted to clarify Keith's comment, but I actually was going to speak to what Tamika was getting at. Tamika, I know in 7B, we have been trying to get a historical understanding of what happened with 7E02 Fort Davis too, because when you go to our ANC meetings, a lot of Fort Davis issues end up at our ANC meetings. We have a lot of, somebody put it best, community assets in common. So we are trying to do that due diligence ourselves too, for the ones who represent 7B, okay, to understand that better.
Thank you. Task force, any other task force contributions for the evening on what we're speaking about? I don't see any hands. Any general questions from the task force? Not necessarily about 7C or 7E, any general questions that you would want everyone who's with us tonight to be a part of.
What is the turnaround time for the notes for all that was provided for 7E? I just want to make sure that I didn't miss anything as I kind of dig a little deeper for my opinions at a later date.
So in reference to the notes that are being collected this evening overall for this meeting?
Yes.
Well, the meeting's being recorded, but there's also, with the recording, there is a transcript that is pretty much available. The last time it was like within a couple of days. It was, I myself had to go back and look at it. And that's, that's pretty accurate in terms of, well, actually it is accurate. It's the actual meeting and the actual transcripts that takes all of the guesswork out of note-taking. But I myself am jotting down my personal notes for reference. And then at the beginning of the meeting, we had Task Force Member Bowden sort of voluntold, not by me, but I think she's doing a terrific job at taking notes that she's going to be willing to share with us at some point. I didn't put a deadline on her, so maybe she can speak up for herself at this point. You're on mute.
I have very rough notes that I can share at the conclusion of this meeting of what we heard and who said what kind of thing.
Oh, no, that's fine. I just want to make sure that I didn't miss anything as I have some connecting and background information to dig for as well.
Okay, and you might want to add to this things that I didn't catch, so that might be good.
Okay.
And Task Force Member Kassan, or Kason, my apologies. Like Commissioner Blair said, I will send you all the recording, the Zoom recording, so you have that to look back as well. But I'm also going to save the chat, and I neglected to send that from the last meeting, so you'll get 2 chats from me this evening, so that you have any commentary from the public as well. So you'll get the chat, you'll get the recording, and in addition to Task Force Member Bowden's notes that she's taking as well.
Thank you.
You are welcome. And Commissioner Blair, you do have, there's a question in the chat around the timing with redistricting. Will the general public get a chance to comment on proposed redistricting maps from this task force? Did you want to address that question?
I'll address that question. We have 2 more listening sessions. The dates have yet to be determined because we are taking into consideration the availability of the task force members, so they will be able to, as many as possible, participate. But we're on an every other week is what we're doing. So our next listening session would be the week of the 13th, somewhere between the 13th and the 19th. That would be for specifically, primarily for 7B and 7F. Then the third and final listening session. And the format for these will be pretty much identical to how we went through it tonight. The third listening session would be the week of the February 27th through March 5th. And that would be for ANC 7D. And then we also have the addition of 6A and 6B, portions of those commissions, not those entire commissions, but portions of those commissions that have come into Ward 7. And then following that, we still have 2 task force specific meetings that are open to the public. And the first task force meeting, we will, based on the comments and consideration given to what we're hearing from the public and being very attuned to what we are required to do as far as keeping the population of the S&Ds within range and a whole list of other things, trying to keep communities together. We'll come up with a few maps for discussion. And then ultimately we have to make a single recommendation. And it's not just coming up with a map, we have to justify everything. So we can't just say, oh, I want to be in this particular ANC, or I want to be in that SMD. It has to be justifiable based on the guidelines that we'll be operating under. And to get that information out to the task force, we'll make sure everybody knows where to go and what to look for in terms of references for that. So yes, the public can still weigh in. 2 more public sessions. Then we'll have the 2 primarily will be focused on discussion and contributions from the task force based on public input. Does that help?
And Commissioner Blair, if I can add to that just to round out the redistricting process, so that I hate talking when I'm not on camera because I think that's rude. Just so the general public is aware that once the task force is finished with its work and sends its report to the council, which is due to the council on April 1st, the task force, these are just recommendations. The council still has to vote on these recommendations from each of the ward task forces. So once it gets to the council, the subcommittee on redistricting will hold a hearing on the recommendations from the various task forces, and that will happen likely in mid-April, mid-May. And then in May, the subcommittee on redistricting will hold a markup or vote on their recommendation. So they'll look at what each ward task force has said. They'll either say, yes, we agree with this recommendation of what the new ANC SMD boundaries should be in each ward, or they'll say, no, we don't like this, based on public input from the hearing that they hold. So they'll have a vote in May, and then once those recommendations are voted out of subcommittee, they go to the full council in June for a vote, so that everything is lined up and in time for the upcoming election cycle. So that is the schedule for what is to happen. So hopefully that answers the other part of the question for our neighbor who asked that question. So I wanted to share that information.
Thank you, Chief of Staff Bunn, for those details. At this point, we're about to close out, but I'm going to turn this over to my co-chair, Joel Caston, and he will close us out for the evening.
And my apologies, Commissioner Blair. I saw that Task Force Member Max Richmond has had his hand raised for a minute. I missed him. My apologies. But wanted to make sure he had that opportunity because I missed his hand being raised.
Go right ahead.
Okay, well, I'll be very brief because I don't like standing between the end of a meeting and where I am right now, but I'm standing here and I'm already wasting everyone's time by talking about it. But what I wanted to do was make sure the public knew about the great resources that were shared with this task force. Number one, the mapping tool that anybody, I believe, can go in and make maps. Is that correct? And number two, the video that was recorded during the training on how to use that mapping tool. So I'm going to post that for everyone so they can go and start making their own maps as well. I just wanted to make sure that in the spirit of what I've been hearing from my fellow task force members, that the public is also making maps and familiar with the technology that we will be using for our final product.
Thank you, Mr. Rich.
And Task Force Member Richmond, just to add on to that, for those members of the public who are going to make maps, please make sure that you share with everyone so that this task force is able to see what your map is, because when you make a map, it is not automatically shared with the task force. We will have to create a group for the task force, but there's no way to invite the entire public to that group so that we see the different maps. So if you are a member of the public and you do use the mapping tool, there is an option to share. And in that share, you'll just have to share it with everyone. And then that way, but please name it Ward 7 ANC map or whatever creative name you come up with, please identify it so that the Ward 7 task force members can go into it and pick up and see your map. So clearly identify, don't just say, you know, Sheila's map, but Ward 7 ANC redistricting map or something like that so that the task force members can easily find it. But do share your map within the tool, but you'll have to share it with everyone, and then we'll have to go in and pick it up so we can see what your map looks like. Thank you.
Mm-hmm. Wonderful. Thank you again, Ms. Bond, for all your service and your guidance in this process. To the task force members and the community at large, thank you for your time. We had a very impactful meeting today without respect. I just want to remind us all that, as we stated before, when you look at the word community, unity is found inside of there. So unity, you can't have community without unity. And what we're doing is unified effort for the whole of Ward 7. Good evening, everyone. Have a blessed night.
Have a good
Good night,
evening.
everybody.
Thank you. Good night.
Bye.
Night.